Truck fans, this is the video you've been waiting for. This is Bigfoot, king of the monster truck. 60 minutes of non-stop monster truck action that will blow you away. It's all new, brand new. You'll see it all from car-crushing heroics to dangerous monster truck rollovers, heart-pounding wheel stands, monster truck drag racing, hill climb, music videos, and Bigfoot deep in the mud. Witness the first car crush ever and ride in the cab with Bigfoot as he pours on the power, plus much, much more. Nothing stops this giant muscle machine as he flies through the air. Jumping cars and smashing everything in his way. This is the video that everyone's talking about. This is the ultimate in monster truck excitement. This is Bigfoot, king of the monster trucks. This offer not available in stores, so order yours today. Have your charge card ready and call now 1-800-848-9000 to get your copy of Bigfoot, king of the monster trucks for $24.95 plus shipping and handling. Call now and get a Bigfoot cap free. Offer not available in stores, so call now 1-800-848-9000. It's a
GCA, this is Army 212, 7 miles northwest, low fuel, heavy weather.
Army 212 radar contact, turn right, heading 15.
How's it going? Welcome to the Deadman Horror Show. I'm your host, Mr. Deadman. In this episode, we're talking about resurrection. We're talking about people trying to bring back their lost loved one. And we lost loved ones. People trying to bring back those that have left this mortal coil. People that they cherish. I'm sure you could relate to this. Maybe you've lost someone this year. Maybe it's been a couple years ago. Maybe it's been several years ago. And maybe you think, what if you could bring them back? What if you could? I don't know who it is in your life. Maybe it's someone significant. Maybe it's a family member that's close to you. Maybe it's a friend. But if there was a way to bring them back, would you do that? Does it depend on the cost? What if it worked? What if, I don't know if you ever explored like Wiccan rituals or satanic rituals that supposedly would bring back the dead or the channel connections with far beyond or anything like that. There's people that do. There's people that have supposed Book of Shadows. Book of Shadows is a book where you keep your spells in, supposedly. Does it work? Well, if those things worked, then, then just about everybody would be doing them, right? If they worked, well, I think more people would be doing them. We're going to talk about this. There are some real examples, real recent examples of people doing very strange things in an effort to try to bring back a lost loved one. Now, before we get into that, there is a story I would like to read you. This story is called The Light at the End of the World, and it's by Sheldon Woodbury. Part of the series from Deadman's Tome called Hardcore Gothic. Gothic Hardcore. Deadman's Tome is open for submissions. Go to deadmanstome.net to check out the guidelines. You can send in a story that's Gothic related, and it can also have some splatterpunk elements. Hardcore Gothic. Gothic Hardcore. Now, for those who like to tune into the Deadman Horror Show due to, let's say, Ethan, Ralph, or Killstream or gun-related stuff, I'm going to disappoint you in this episode. There isn't really much there, except for that if Ethan Ralph had the opportunity, the chance to bring back his own mother, would he do this though? Would he do it? He probably wouldn't, because he probably doesn't even care. But, alright, let's go ahead and get into this. The story's called The Light at the End of the World. This is a live reading, ladies and gentlemen. So, anyway, let's go ahead and get this started. The storm clouds were already gathering at daybreak, overtaking the early morning sky. Light struggled to rise on the distant horizon, but it was no match for the gargantuan clouds. The ocean was starting to roil as well. Great gray waves crashing against a rocky shore. In this remote seaside town, the war against the weather had always been a battle against uncontrollable forces. The lighthouse looked like a relic from the past, perched on a craggy patch of land at the water's edge. It was more than 1,000 years old, erected out of rock and stone, now crumbling from the ravages of time. It was built as a beacon for ships sailing to the New World, but safe passage was never guaranteed, given the brutal weather and perilous shoreline. Hidden beneath the crashing waves was a watery underworld of shipwrecked vessels that never reached shore. Skeletal pieces of the sunken ships would sometimes drift to the surface as a reminder of the sprawling necropolis below. There had always been rumors that the lighthouse was haunted, that its gloomy illumination had a more sinister purpose. Much of this had to do with the first keeper, a hermit-like man who was rarely seen in the light of day. When drowned bodies washed ashore after a calamity, he attended the funeral silent and alone, looming away from the mourners with a faraway look. He was a man of mystery, shining a light for travelers seeking a new home, but a watery death was sinking welcome too many received. As the decades and centuries passed, the seaside graveyard grew too, a weed-splattered field with mostly unnamed markers. The rumors continued, but more as a local legend passed from one generation to the next. Still, a screeching wind or a fluttering shadow offered proof to some that the drowned seafarers had come back as ghosts to haunt the place that dashed their dreams. As legends go, it was as much a part of the town's history as anything else that has a provable fact. It was late afternoon when the wooden lighthouse door creaked open and a dark figure emerged. He was tall and gaunt, attired in a tattered black coat with a wool cap tugged low on his head. He raised his gaze to the inky black clouds that were rumbling now, then walked with a slow gait to the edge of the cliff. He stood with an eerie stillness and closed his eyes to better hear the crashing waves and grumbling thunder. This was his sacred place, the misty border between the earth and the sea. He kept his eyes closed, feeling the salt water anoint his face. He opened them again and circled around the lighthouse with the same slow gait. Gusts of wind rustled the nearby cemetery weeds, and black dirt swirled into the air. He usually waited until the end of day, closer to twilight, to take the long walk to town. But this day was different. So he strode down the steep path away from the lighthouse and entered the silent woods. A memory seized him right away, like it always did. the chance encounter that happened in these very same woods. At first, he thought it was a wild animal crunching through the brittle leaves until he heard a soft moan followed by sobbing. He went in search for the weeping sound and came upon a young woman in distress. Her frayed cloth dress was ill-suited for the winter cold, and her small bare feet were bruised and bleeding from her trek through the woods. She had a wild look in her eyes, her sobs coming out in trembling pants. Another man would have taken her back to town where she clearly came, but he wasn't like other men. He was an outsider by nature and choice, and instinctively knew she was as well. He lived a life of seclusion, away from those that shunned him for reasons they didn't fully understand. The frantic look in her eyes told him she needed help from whatever she was running from. He carried her back to his tiny cottage next to the lighthouse and tended to her needs, washing her feet, applying torn cloth bandages, sitting her next to the fire. He wrapped her in a blanket. Her story came out in a shivering hush. She said she had never been right in the head, and her God-fearing parents had seen it as a blasphemous sign of the devil. They unleashed their anger in many ways, always behind closed doors late at night. The tale she told by the crackling fire was about a young life trapped in the world she didn't understand. She had escaped with her parents. She had escaped when her parents were at church meeting and was drawn to the lighthouse for some unfathomable reason. In the days that followed, they never came looking for her, which he took as a sign as well. So he gave her the sanctuary she desperately needed. And now, every part of him was aching as he reached the edge of the woods, because this was the day she died, exactly a year ago. He had returned from the lighthouse at dawn and found her lying lifeless on the floor, stricken from some unknown disease. When the tears came, it was something he had never felt before. A loss so wrenching, he dropped down and cradled her with the same sobs he had heard in the woods when they first met. He buried her in his sacred place in front of the lighthouse, the misty border between the earth and the sea. He was now on the cracked black road that led to town, a trudging walk he only made when necessary. A mud-covered pickup raced past, hoots and hollers crackling out. The town had always treated him as an unwanted stranger, and he thought was the way it should. It was the way it should be. Hardship had made them as cold as the merciless winters that come every year. There were the usual glares as he went from shop to shop to purchase what he needed. The older folk treated him with barely concealed disdain, like there was something unnatural about him that was fine. In fact, he preferred it. The townspeople avoided him, and the shopkeepers hurried him out as quickly as possible. The teenagers were a different matter, though, usually trailing behind him with taunts and sneers. During the past few trips, their number had grown, along with the snarling contempt. This didn't bother him either, blaming their youthful arrogance. He knew that wisdom only came with age, along with so much else. His memory of the lost young woman he had shared his life with for just a short time stayed with him as he gathered what he needed. There were the sugar cookies she loved, the scented candles, and other trinkets. Her time in the cottage had been simple and quiet, most of all safe. He tried to share a few of his secrets, but stopped when he saw her frightened response. Her mind was a fragile place, and his secrets were too unsettling. Her comfort was more important than anything else, so he let that be his daily guide. He left the last shop, and thunder boomed even louder overhead. The heavy haze of the day swiftly turning into night. There was clearly something strange in the air, and maybe that's why the pack of teenagers followed behind him in a way they have never had before. He made his way back to the cracked road and hurried with a faster gait. When he stumbled into the woods, the rattling sky cracked open and a blistering rain came pouring down. He strode back up the dark path and stopped halfway, letting the drenching rain wash over his body with its pounding power. The graveyard markers were pounded too, struggling to stay upright in the soggy ground. Inside the cottage, eagerness put more urgency into his preparations. He wasn't religious, but he did believe in another kind of rapture that was even more radical. The predicted time of mystical transformation. He placed the sugar cookies on a plate next to the fire, arranged her cherished trinkets around the small room, and lit the candles. The scent was sweet, like the cookies, wispy smoke fogging the room. They had lived as outsiders, close to the elements in each other. Their unlikely bond forged in this private place. With this part done, he stepped out the front door into the raging storm again. He could feel the strangeness billowing even more. It wasn't just from the unleashed storms. He could hear the howling teenagers stomping through the woods, now sounding more like feral beasts in search of something to kill. He learned long ago that nothing is what it seems. There are worlds within worlds that can't be seen, except for a chosen few. He walked a short distance to the lighthouse. As lightning set the night sky on fire, the surging maelstrom was like a monstrous behemoth that was suddenly alive. He lit the rusted lantern inside the lighthouse and began his ascension up the winding stairs. The jagged flames revealed carved designs that reached from the bottom to the very top. They seemed random and meaningless, but they were so much more than that. It was a mystical map, and this is where the prophecy was ordained. On this stormy night, in this remote seaside town, a hidden passageway to another world would shudder open. He reached the top of the stairs and activated the lighthouse beam, gazing out at the watery wilderness. The ocean waves were as tall as mountains, and the rain-soaked landscape had an otherworldly sheen. The rapture had begun. The rapture had begun. So he hurried back down the winding stairs. Stumbling outside, he braced himself against the pummeling rain, and there she was. There she was, just as he knew she would be. She was dressed in the black dress he had buried her in, rising up from her grave at the border between the land and the sea. She drifted through the storm to his side, still dead, but no longer buried. Like all the keepers before him, he was so much more than he seemed. The legends were true. The lighthouse was haunted, but not in the way the locals had thought. The keepers were a mysterious lot, keeping vigil at the unknown borders that others couldn't see. From the beginning of time, spirits and phantoms had slipped through these borders, and death was just one of them. Time itself seemed to change, becoming a creepy crawl that made everything even more murky and weird. The pack of howling teenagers lunged out of the woods, not looking like teenagers anymore, but something different. The rapture was all about transformation, and they were becoming something else. They crawled up the slippery hill to the edge of the cliff, and their bodies, not solid, but now more like thrashing water below. Their transformation was just beginning, because there was much more strangeness to come. Their other phantoms, ghostly spirits wafted through the rain, a shimmering horde of dead bodies from the graveyard. Their sunken ships were suddenly set free as well from the underwater muck, erupting up to the surface. As the prophecy had ordained, this would be a time of miracles and madness, as worlds within worlds were set free too. The keeper surveyed the daringness pandemonium, his buried treasure floating by his side, and a fluttering black dress. The sugar cookies she loved were waiting by the crackling fire, along with the trinkets and scented candles. He had never told her his secrets, but now she could see them for himself, along with the shimmering ghosts and beastly teenagers. They stood on the cliff and stared at the glorious behemoths that found passage into their new world. A gloomy lighthouse beam swept out through the rain and wind, giving them the welcome they had been waiting for. And that is The Light at the End of the World by Sheldon Woodbury. The theme in the story, there's several themes in the story, obviously. Being isolated, the isolated stranger, mysterious figure, a man of mysticism, a man of mystery. Obviously, the Lighthouse Keeper kind of reminds me of the movie The Lighthouse. But the Lighthouse Keeper with the secrets far greater than that in the movie The Lighthouse. Something beyond, something macabre. It kind of goes with the theme of a lighthouse. What is a lighthouse? Right, it's to guide ships, but oftentimes how many do those ships not make it? And what is it then? The usage of a lighthouse for the spirits, for the transformation. It's pretty clever, pretty good. It works. Some might say cliche, but it works. Because what is a lighthouse? Shines a beacon to guide. And this one, what guides and brings in the spirits, helps them find where they are. Okay, so, but the theme for this episode is lost loved ones, are resurrection stories. Okay, so this is a piece of fiction, right? But like I stated in the beginning of this episode, there are real examples of people trying to bring back their lost loved ones. I don't know about you. I don't know about your dating life. But I will tell you that if you've ever dated some chick that was deep into Wicca, she might have said some things. She might have shared some things with you about spells and stuff like that to try to bring back a lost pet. Have you ever tried to do that? Would you do that? That's something that Stephen King explored in Pet Sematary. But it was much more than that, right? Sun dies, can bring back the sun. This is a theme that's very common in horror. It is so common. because it's something so human. Dealing with grief, dealing with the loss. If you could bring someone back, you totally would, wouldn't you? Part of you that wouldn't. But if there was a way, if there was a button you can push, if there was something you can do, and if you didn't even know what the consequences would be, maybe they said there would be no consequences. Maybe they said it'd be fine. You would do it, wouldn't you? Now, there is a recent story that happened last year, 2020. A man in Tennessee, stricken by grief, wanted to try to bring back his grandmother. So what does he do? He goes to the church cemetery where she was buried. And he tries to summon her. He tries everything he can. He is trying to channel her. This is real. You can look it up yourself. What does he end up doing in the process? Trying to bring back his grandmother. He's out there in the church cemetery, smashing tombstones. Why is he smashing the tombstones? Because he thinks it will work. He's enraged. He's enraged because his attempt to channel with his grandmother wasn't working the way he thought it would. So he starts smashing tombstones and starts digging up graves, starts digging into the soil, into the hollowed earth. The man causes $30,000 worth of damage to the cemetery in his attempt to resurrect his dead grandmother. Now, I'm not sure what his connection is with his grandmother, or why he felt the need to do this. Maybe it's something innocent. Maybe he really loved her. Maybe it's something twisted. Maybe there was something that the grandmother, maybe there was a bond between them that's very twisted or warped in a way that would be fitting for the show to explore. But I guess right now with the subject matter, we'll go ahead and make it pass. You know what I'm talking about. There's some very sick, twisted minds out there, right? You can probably fathom what I'm talking about. Because why does a man go to a church cemetery to damage tombstones, start digging into the soil to bring back his dead grandmother? Was he wanting to bring her back so he can claim her as alive and so he can continue to collect the money, the government check? Was it that? Or was it something innocent? Was it that he really loved her and wanted her to come back? Unfortunately, we don't know the motive. We can only speculate. Speculation can be fun. Speculation is what creates urban legends. What gives it breathing room to become something more than what it is. Maybe there was a connection between the two. Maybe it was something sick and twisted. Maybe it was something like Psycho. Something at that level. But the grandmother was maybe kind of abusive, very emotionally abusive towards this man. And maybe he killed her. And tried to be her. Tried to live as the grandmother. Kind of divided in his mind. But he couldn't take it anymore. He had to bring her back. He had to try. So he finds out about the Wiccan spells, or maybe he finds some satanic spells. He finds some pagan rituals that might be able to bring someone back. So he goes to the cemetery and tries to do that sort of thing, but it's not working. So he starts smashing tombstones. And when that doesn't work, he starts digging into the soil. Because you do these rituals, you light up the candles, you get the right candles, you put them in the right area, and you do the little chant, and it's not working. Okay. He's determined. We're talking about $30,000 worth of damage. Now, There's also, not too long ago, in North Carolina, a man named Johnny, 67. His wife dies. His wife dies of a sudden heart attack. Now, this one's more practical. You can see where this is going. His wife dies of a heart attack. So what does he try to do? He can't live without her. That's what he said. That's what he was claimed to have been said. We don't know for sure because he died in this situation. She dies. He dies. Wow. She dies of a sudden heart attack. And he does everything he can to try to bring her back. Constant CPR. Trying to breathe life into his lifeless wife. Trying to breathe into her. But it doesn't work. Now it sounds innocent. Sounds okay. He's just trying to revive. That's not really a resurrection. And there's more to the story. Rumor has it, urban legend has it, that the man, dissatisfied with his own life, dissatisfied with the debt he has collected, with the mistakes, financial mistakes, big, grave mistakes he had made, he didn't want to live anymore. If he could, he would put his life in his dead wife to let her live and he can pass on. Maybe he could live in the body, in the vessel of his dead wife. Is that possible? Is that possible? Well, people would just say, no, it isn't possible. It doesn't say, Mr. Deadman, you can't do that. When there are scientific studies in the matter, well, they're on the fringe, aren't they? Or if you were ever curious, definitely look into scientific research into the fringe, and you'll find that oftentimes there are psychologists that are connected with that. Interesting. What's going on with that? Anyway. So yeah, Johnny in North Carolina, his wife dies. He tries to breathe his life, his spirit, his soul into her body so she can live. He can live in her. Because he did not want to live anymore. He couldn't live without her, but he wanted to live inside her. Now, what tops this all, I think, and I might be wrong here, let me know in the chat or in the comment section. How far would you go to try to bring back a lost loved one? That's something I said in the beginning of this. How far would you go? Would you explore the unknown? Would you research various rituals, maybe go into voodoo rituals, get into things you know nothing about, and really you're just reading stuff on the internet, so who knows, it could just be a troll. Would you look up ancient books, try to find ancient literature that maybe could explain? Do you go in, how deep do you go into the dark arts to try to bring someone back? Is that the path you take? Or do you think through the act of self-harming, you could bring someone back? That spilling your blood, cutting your flesh, spilling your blood, that you can bring somebody back. There's a woman in South Africa that tried something very similar. A 35-year-old woman in South Africa is dealing with the loss of her father. He had died about 12 years before this incident. This incident took place around 2019. But those 12 years, she was still dealing with the heavy loss, and she could not live. She wanted to bring him back. Her love for her father was so strong, she wanted to bring him back, and she was willing to try anything. And I mean anything. How far does she go? farther than you will probably ever go. Farther than you and I will probably ever go. This woman tries to immolate. This woman tries to set herself on fire in the hopes that her burning flesh, her boiling blood, her burning body, the pain of that would somehow bring back her father. Would you do that? No, you wouldn't, right? It's not something a reasonable human being would do, but we know that grief has a way to make us not reasonable. You've seen it. If you're honest with yourself, maybe you would explore that. Maybe you would share that. You probably know family members or friends that their way of dealing with grief wasn't so rational. Granted, they probably didn't try to set themselves on fire in a way to, I guess, that the pain, the self-inflicted pain would somehow bring back the spirit. But maybe they did something else. There are stories of mothers that buy life-size dolls. Life-size dolls. And named them after their son or daughter, because their son or daughter was shot up at a school, or was ran over by a truck, or died of cancer, was taken away from them. A parent should not be burying their son or daughter. It's the son or daughter that should be burying the parent. And when a parent has to go with that loss, it is difficult, to say the least. At the point of bringing that up, it is dealing with that loss where people do things that don't seem very rational. Buying a doll and naming it after your son or daughter that was taken away from you in a violent way, premature. Is that rational? Is that sane? Is that normal? Is that reasonable? It's difficult to say, huh? You would say no. I would say no. But at the same time, if it helps them deal with the loss, then maybe it is. Maybe it's okay. It doesn't become a crutch. Does it become a delusion that... Does it become a delusion that becomes so powerful that it consumes them? Where they start having tea time with this doll, where they start taking the doll in the car, start walking around the mall with the doll, maybe walking around looking for Christmas gifts, buying Christmas gifts for the doll, celebrating birthdays with the doll. That seems normal. But you might be surprised how often that happens. I know a story where someone was dealing with the loss of a loved one, and what they would do is they would make breakfast, lunch, and dinner for their dead husband. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the dead husband that wasn't there. Would leave it on the table. His favorite spot. And they would do this consistently. It wasn't like for a little while. It wasn't for a couple months or for a year. It became a ritual that they lived until dementia got them. Until dementia made it impossible for them to continue doing that. I want to bring this up is dealing with grief, dealing with loss of a loved one, we often do things that don't seem very rational. But why do we do that? Do we think it's going to bring them back? Do we? I think that's a yes. I think there's a yes to that. Now, the hope might be small, it might be slim. When the mom that buys the doll of their dead son or daughter, why do they do that? For themselves to deal with the loss? Do they think that there is a chance that maybe if they pray to God enough that maybe they'll come back? Do you think that's true? Why do they do that? Here are these real examples. We have a man who vandalized a cemetery behind a church. Over $30,000 worth of damage, trying to dig into the hollowed earth, smashing tombstones when it's not working, destroying other grave marks, totally disrespecting the other bodies that were buried there. We have Johnny trying desperately to bring back his wife who died, and he dies in the process while trying to do that. Then we have this woman in South Africa that thought that setting yourself on fire, turning herself into a barbecue, would somehow bring back her dead father. This relates to the story, the light at the end of the world. Or in that story, it is, can you bring somebody back? Would you if you had that chance? And I think if you're honest with yourself, you would say yes. Now, some may say no because they know there's always a catch. And what is it that comes back if you were successful? That's a constant theme too in horror. The monkey's paw, talisman, that cemetery. It's very common. Even if you could bring someone back from the dead, a lost loved one, and you were successful, what would come back? Would you want that? Would they want that? Now, in our story by Sheldon Woodbury, it doesn't explore necessarily the consequence of bringing someone back. What we have is he was able to bring back a woman that he loved very much, but he brought her back into a world that he's very familiar with the secrets that he couldn't tell her, couldn't show her, because she wasn't ready for it. Of course, as a work of fiction, we're talking about a fantasy horror world of the undead, a realm where the undead are alive, apparently. So, let me wrap up this episode here, once again by asking, if you had the ability to bring someone back from the dead, a lost loved one, would you? Would you? And let me know what you thought about the story, the light at the end of the world. This was a live reading. Some parts was like, I might have missed a word. I thought it was a pretty good story. I liked it. I liked the theme. But let me know in the comment section. That said, y'all take it easy and have a good one.